what's right and what's fair. Even if some people will be uncomfortable, we will continue to shout out the truth and stand by the righteous and boldly say that we will speak of what we know is right, even though it will hurt some people. From here, I would like to thank all the courageous people who show solidarity with the Palestinian people without discrimination of faith, country, language, or religion, and who take to the streets almost every week to raise their voices against the massacres in Gaza. I would like to especially thank the university students and the youth. Distinguished delegates, unfortunately, in the 14th year of the conflict, Syria is still far from stability. The economic and humanitarian situation in the country, in the grip of terrorism and separatist organizations, remains dire. On the basis of UN Security Council Resolution 2254, we hope to advance the political process and achieve national reconciliation. We are determined to sincerely pursue our position in favor of a realistic dialogue. We are very sincere in that regard. Our neighbor Iraq, while continuing its fight against terrorism, is taking decisive steps towards development, reconstruction, and reintegration with its region. And the international community must support Iraq's efforts. In this context, it is important to implement initiatives such as the Development Road Project, which will benefit the entire region on a win-win basis. The success of all these efforts depend on the complete elimination of the terrorist threat in Iraq, in particular the PKK. We are strengthening our common action plan with another neighbor of ours, Iran, in the region in order to establish stability and peace. It's going to contribute tremendously to our efforts. The war in Ukraine has been going on for 3 years, and we are still away from establishing a permanent peace and stability. As the arms race accelerates, the space for diplomacy is shrinking. It's very important that diplomacy and dialogue will ensure territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, and our support for those endeavors of Turkey will continue even strongly. And again, during this process, we are determined to implement the Montreux Convention on the Straits. We will rigorously implement the Montreux Convention. We support the peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia and hope that this process will be concluded as soon as possible with good news. We support continued high-level contacts between the two countries. And we are focusing on dialogue. Turkey and Armenia, we are also taking positive steps on that track too. Progress in the Azerbaijan-Armenia peace process will have a positive impact on the Turkey-Armenia normalization process. Dear friends, we play a constructive role for the prosperity and peace at the Balkans, of which we are an integral part, and we act in close cooperation with all actors in the region. As a member of the Steering Committee for Peace Implementation Council, we emphasize the importance of the sovereignty, political unity, and territorial integrity of Bosnia and Herzegovina on every platform, and continue our contribution to Operation EUFOR Althea. We are successfully continuing the Key 4 command we assumed last year and supporting the Belgrade-Pristina dialogue process. We want to see the Aegean Sea and the Eastern Mediterranean as a zone of stability and prosperity where the legitimate interests of all the parties are concerned can be respected. It is in the common interest of the entire region to enhance cooperation, particularly on the delimitation of maritime jurisdictions in accordance with international law, freedom and safety of navigation, and maritime trade. International maritime law encourages cooperation between littoral states in closed or semi-closed seas, such as the Aegean Sea. Turkey is ready for constructive cooperation on all issues, especially in energy and environment. We have the longest coastline in the Eastern Mediterranean, and Turkey's key role is undeniable. Turkey has legitimate rights and authorities in the western part of the island of Cyprus, while the Turkish Cypriots have legitimate rights in the areas around the world. It has been 50 years since the Cyprus peace operation and 61 years since the Cyprus issue emerged as a result of the Greek Cypriot usurpation of the partnership state. From that day until today, peace and tranquility have prevailed on the island. It was always the Turkish Cypriots and Turkey who put forth the sincere will to bring about a just, lasting, and sustainable solution to the Cyprus issue. The federation model is now completely outdated, and we fully support the vision of a two-state solution with two different nations put forward by the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. The sovereign, equality, and equal international status of the Turkish Cypriots, which are the vested rights of the Turkish Cypriots, must be re-registered and the isolation must end. Today, I once again invite the international community to recognize the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus and to establish diplomatic, political, and economic relations. We actively support the stabilization of Libya and the preservation of the unity and integrity of the country. We call on all states to sincerely stand by Libya at this very sensitive time and contribute to building trust between the parties. We must do more to end the conflict in Sudan. We all have a responsibility to deliver humanitarian assistance to the millions of Sudanese people displaced by the conflict. With its young and dynamic population, rich natural resources, and vast fertile lands, Africa has enormous potential. Based on the principles of equal partnership and mutual respect, hand in hand with the peoples of Africa, we support the continent's efforts for peace, stability, and development. We will continue to stand in full solidarity with our African brothers and sisters. As part of our initiatives, we are strengthening our deep-rooted ties with Asia. We are deepening our engagement with our partner regional organizations such as ASEAN, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the Pacific Islands Forum. We keep our will to develop our relations with BRICS, which brings together emerging economies alive. We share a deep-rooted history with the countries of Central Asia, and we are further strengthening our cooperation on bilateral and multilateral grounds. Our Organization of Turkic States is gradually turning into a center of attraction. The organization is becoming an exemplary model of cooperation with the contributions of observer members Hungary and the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus. We will further strengthen our unity and our togetherness as the Turkic world. And within the framework of respect for China's sovereignty and territorial integrity, we are in close dialogue with China to protect the fundamental rights and freedoms of Uyghur Turks, with whom we have strong historical, cultural, and humanitarian ties. We endeavor to build on the friendly ties we have established with the countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Distinguished delegates, we must work together to address global injustice. The United Nations Sustainable Development Goals concept of leaving no one behind is a guiding principle for these efforts. As one of the largest aid donors relative to its gross domestic product, Turkey's development cooperation activities contribute to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. We contribute to efforts to ensure fair, inclusive growth and development in all international platforms, especially the G20, of which we are a member. We approach technological breakthroughs not as a source of new injustice and conflicts, but as a source of a more prosperous future, such as AI. We believe that all nations should equally benefit from the transformative power of these breakthrough technologies. The United Nations Technology Bank for Least Developed Countries, which we are hosting, is a concrete manifestation of our efforts in this direction. But unfortunately, the cyber terror attacks that took place in Lebanon last week show us once again how deadly these technologies can be used as weapons. I approach the climate change issue from that same perspective. No country can tackle emission reductions and climate change adaptation alone. The most important issues for developing countries are financing, technology transfer, and capacity building. I sincerely believe that the COP29 climate summit in Baku will contribute to the solution of these issues. At the summit, we expect to launch important additional initiatives and unveil our long-term low-emission development strategy and the zero waste initiative that became a reality under the auspices of my spouse, Madam Emine Erdogan. And with mutual agreements, we have taken our domestic affairs and initiatives to international agendas. I would like to ask everybody to support our endeavors in that regard. We see Islamophobia, xenophobia, and racism creeping over the world like a poison ivy. We can see that every week attacks are taking place upon our mosques and our holy book of Quran. In the middle of Europe, people's homes are set on fire and lives are taken because of their ethnic and religious affiliation. Their lives are taken away from them and their fundamental rights are being suspended. And nobody can ignore this growing danger any longer. On March 15th, 2024, we expect a special envoy to combat Islamophobia to be appointed at the United Nations as soon as possible, as envisaged in the draft resolution adopted on March the 15th. Today, I would like to draw your attention once again to the danger that I raised last year on this podium. Attacks on the institution of family, the pillar of society, are increasing. The disgrace staged at the opening of the 2024 Olympic Games has revealed the extent of the threat we face as humanity. A sporting event watched by innocent children and hundreds of millions of people of all ages and beliefs has been used as a tool for a sexist propaganda. It was actually a parade of bad scenes. Those disturbing scenes of evil have wounded not only the Catholic world, the Christian world, but everyone who respects the sacred values. The issue of desexualization is no longer an orientation, but a global imposition. It literally became a war against the sacred and human nature. We are facing a multidimensional, comprehensive, and ruthless project of destruction who are speaking out and who are reacting to this evil. Anyone who raises a voice for this annihilation project is silenced and targeted by lynch campaigns. And Turkey is determined to break this siege and resist the climate of fear. To this end, we became a member of the United Nations Friends of the Family Group. Inshallah, God willing, together with other member countries, we will not hesitate to defend the family, the human being, and the human nature. I invite all the countries that share our sentiments to shoulder this struggle. With these thoughts in mind, I wish that the 79th General Assembly will be auspicious for all humanity. I greet you all once again with love and respect. May peace be with you and may you remain in health.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Turkey, The Assembly will hear an address by His Majesty King Abdullah II Ibn al-Hussein, King of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan. I request protocol to escort His Majesty and invite him to address the Assembly.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Your Excellencies. Over the past quarter century, I have stood at this podium amidst regional conflicts, global upheavals, and humanitarian crises that have profoundly tested our global community. It often feels that there was not a moment when our world was not in turmoil. And yet, I cannot recall a time of greater peril than this. Our United Nations is facing a crisis that strikes at its very legitimacy and threatens a collapse of global trust and moral authority. The UN is under attack, literally and figuratively. For nearly a year, the sky blue flag flying over UN shelters and schools in Gaza has been powerless to protect innocent civilians from Israeli military bombardment. UN aid trucks sit motionless just miles away from starving Palestinians. Humanitarian workers who proudly wear the emblem of this institution are disparaged and targeted. And the rulings of the UN's International Court of Justice are defied, its opinions disregarded. So it's no surprise that both inside and outside this hall, trust in UN's cornerstone principles and ideals is crumbling. The harsh reality many see is that some nations are above international law, that global justice does bend to the will of power, and that human rights are selective, a privilege to be granted or denied at will. We cannot stand for that. And we must recognize that undermining our international institutions and global frameworks is one of the gravest threats to our global security today. Ask yourselves, if we are not nations united in the conviction that all people are equal in rights, dignity, and worth, and that all countries are equal in the eyes of the law, what kind of world does that leave us with? Your Excellencies, the attacks of October 7th on Israeli civilians last year were condemned by countries all over the world, including Jordan. But the unprecedented scale of terror unleashed on Gaza since that day is beyond any justification. The Israeli government's assault has resulted in one of the fastest death rates in recent conflicts, one of the fastest rates of starvation caused by war, the largest cohort of child amputees, and unprecedented levels of destruction. This Israeli government has killed more children, more journalists, more aid workers, and more medical personnel than any other war in recent memory. And let us not forget the attacks on the West Bank. There, since October 7th, the Israeli government has killed more than 700 Palestinians, among them 160 children. Palestinians held in Israeli detention centers exceed 10,700, including 400 women and 730 children. 730 children. Over 4,000 Palestinians have been forced from their homes and lands. Armed settler violence has surged, and entire villages have been displaced. And in Jerusalem, a flagrant violations of the historical and legal status quo at Muslim and Christian holy sites continue unabated under the protection and encouragement of members of the Israeli government. To be clear, this is in the West Bank, not Gaza. Almost 42,000 Palestinians have been killed since October 7th. So is it any wonder that many are questioning how can this war not be perceived as deliberately targeting the Palestinians? The level of civilian suffering cannot be written off as unavoidable collateral. I grew up a soldier in a region that is all too familiar with conflict. But there is nothing familiar about this war and the violence unleashed since October 7th. In the absence of global accountability, repeated horrors are normalized, threatening to create a future where anything is permitted, anywhere in the world. Is that what we want? Now is the time to ensure the protection of the Palestinian people. It is the moral duty of this international community to establish a protection mechanism for them across the occupied territories. This will guarantee the safety of Palestinians and Israelis from extremists who are taking our region to the brink of an all-out war. That includes those who continue to propagate the idea of Jordan as an alternative homeland. So let me be very, very clear. That will never happen. We will never accept the forced displacement of Palestinians, which is a war crime. No country in the region benefits from escalation. We have seen that clearly in the dangerous developments in Lebanon over the past few days. This has to stop. For years, the Arab world has extended a hand to Israel through the Arab Peace Initiative, offering full recognition and normalization in exchange for peace. But consecutive Israeli governments, emboldened by years of impunity, have rejected peace and chosen confrontation instead. Impunity gathers force. Left unchecked, it gains momentum. Palestinians have borne more than 57 years of occupation and oppression. During this time, the Israeli government has been allowed to cross one red line after another. But now, Israel's decades-long impunity is becoming its own worst enemy, and the consequences are everywhere. The Israeli government has been accused of genocide at the ICJ. Expressions of outrage at its conduct are echoing around the world. Cities everywhere have seen mass protests, and calls for sanctions are growing louder. International frustration with Israel has long been mounting, but it has never been more exposed. For decades, Israel has projected itself as a thriving Western-style democracy in the Middle East. But the brutality of the war on Gaza has forced the world to look closer. Now many see Israel through the eyes of its victims. And the contradiction, the paradox, is too jarring. The modern advanced Israel admired from afar, and the Israel that Palestinians have experienced firsthand, simply cannot coexist. Israel will eventually be entirely one or the other. That is the choice its leaders and its people will have to make. To live by the democratic values of freedom, justice, and equality for all, or to risk further isolation and rejection. Over and over, we have watched Israel try to achieve security through military means. Each escalation is followed by a pause until the next deadlier one. And for years, the global community has taken the path of least resistance, accepting the status quo of the ongoing military occupation of Palestinians, all the while paying lip service to the two-state solution. But it has never been more evident that the current status quo is untenable. And as the International Court of Justice's advisory opinion underscored 2 months ago, it is unequivocally illegal. The Court's opinion bears a moral imperative to us all. The obligation it carries is one that our nations cannot afford to ignore for the sake of our world, as well as the future for Palestinians and Israelis alike. Because both peoples deserve to live their lives in dignity, free of violence and fear. And the only way to achieve that is a just peace, one grounded in international law, justice, equal rights, and mutual recognition. That is something we as nations and people everywhere can and must unite around. Your Excellencies, the world is watching, and history will judge us by the courage we show. And it is not just the future that will hold us accountable, so will the people of the here and now. They will judge whether we as the United Nations will surrender to inaction or will fight to uphold the principles that anchor this institution and our world. Right now they are asking whether we will stand by as parents watch their children waste away, as doctors watch their patients die for lack of basic medical supplies, and as more innocent lives are lost because the world failed to act. This war must end. Hostages and detainees must return home. But every day we wait is one day too long for far too many. So I call on all countries to join Jordan in enforcing an international Gaza humanitarian gateway, a massive relief effort to deliver food, clean water, medicine, and other vital supplies to those in desperate need. Because humanitarian aid should never be a tool of war. Whatever our politics, one truth is undeniable. No people should have to endure such unprecedented suffering, abandoned and alone. We cannot surrender the future to those who thrive on division and conflict. I urge all nations of conscience to unite with Jordan in the critical weeks ahead on this mission. Almost a year into this war, our world has failed politically, but our humanity must not fail the people of Gaza any longer. Echoing the words of my father from 64 years ago at the 15th session of the General Assembly, I pray that this community of nations may have the courage to decide wisely and fearlessly, and will act with urgent resolve that this crisis and our conscience demand. My father was a man who fought for peace to the very end. And like him, I refuse to leave my children or your children a future we have given up on. Thank you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the King of the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan.
La Asamblea escuchará.
The Assembly will now hear an address by the President of my country, the Republic of Guatemala, His Excellency, Mr. Cesar Bernardo Arevalo de Leon. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly, and this is a very special honor for me.
Excelentísima.
Your Excellency Carlos Rodriguez, Vice President of the 79th session of the General Assembly. His Excellency Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations Organization, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, heads of state and government, honourable delegates, ladies and gentlemen.
The
people of Guatemala greet the world. I greeted you in the language of the Quiché people, one of the ancestral and most influential communities of Guatemala. Their power and that of the various peoples of Guatemala is what sustains our government. It is the strength of our country. It is the resounding voice of those that have not been heard, of those that have been marginalized, but who have a lot to say, a lot to contribute, who have a place to play in building our collective future. I'm here as a result of two clear expressions of popular will. The first, a vote which unanimously rejected the representatives of the authoritarian past of Guatemala, and it granted me the honor of the presidency to lead the national effort to move towards a future of justice, equality, and progress. The second was the defense that the society of Guatemala, by various means of expression, reaffirmed and defended on the streets with regard to the decision that they took at the polls when a corrupt minority attempted to impose their further rule and cheat democracy. Our democracy will not be complete, it could not exist, without the impetus which is so decisive and courageous of the Mayan people of Guatemala, of people of mixed descent, of the Garinagu people of the Caribbean and of the Xinca people. It is a democracy that comes from the four corners of the country, from these four peoples. Together we form a nation. And the role of our government is to give a sense of unity to this diversity and to move forwards towards a prosperous and inclusive future. I would like to express particular thanks on the part of Guatemala to the countries, peoples and governments that were together with us, together with the people of Guatemala during this historic gesture in 2023, and for the support that they continue to give us in our efforts to rescue our democratic institutions. And we are doing this through dialogue, a dialogue which is part of a great national consensus, something which all Guatemalans share over and above our ideological differences, our cultural diversity, our various ways of seeing the world. And I am sure that in this forum everyone can identify with this consensus. Namely, we cannot continue to tolerate corruption. Corruption, when the few abuse what belongs to everyone to benefit themselves, is like an anchor that chains us to the past, and it prevents us from growing, from prospering and building a society which is based on the common good. In the case of Guatemala, corruption's roots are buried in our authoritarian past of repression, of political violence, of social exclusion. But we are breaking free from this. We are freeing ourselves from the chains of the dark past, and what we are seeing reborn is a young, creative, vital, joyous but anxious nation. Young people who will not be silent in the light of injustices and in the light of corruption. A diverse community that is building the future. A future where everyone has a seat at the table, where opportunities multiply, where cooperation and solidarity optimize talent, creativity, and individual efforts, where parents are able to sleep peacefully knowing that health and educational opportunities for their children are will be guaranteed, where work will be fairly remunerated, and where prosperity will not require immoral acts of corruption, where the earth, our earth, will be treated with gratitude and respect, and it will give us in exchange clean spaces for us to work, to live, to recreate ourselves, to grow. This is the future that we are building for Guatemala. And this future is not emerging in a vacuum. For us, we see it as coming from within, from our principles, from our own values, from our own cosmovision. Our government is made up of the diverse peoples of Guatemala, and these are the values and the vision of these four peoples. They are the instruments that we are using to navigate this ocean of transformation. In the same way, this very important forum, and so necessary for global coexistence and for the progress of all nations, must look inwards and return to its fundamental values and use them to navigate the complex reality that we are facing today as a planet. The time has come to rescue multilateralism, to revitalize dialogue for peace, and to take concrete actions in order to resolve the most urgent problems afflicting us. Let us begin at the beginning. War, this horror that motivated the opening of this global forum, has commanded once again our attention. It is becoming a permanent reality, but in the recent last 2 years has become desperate, an intensity that we did not expect. We cannot tolerate it. We cannot tolerate war. We cannot ignore international conflicts that affect the peace and security of us all. We must not abandon hope of a world without war, of a future of peace. Guatemala would like to reiterate its solidarity with countries that are suffering from armed conflicts and unjustified wars. We would call upon the members of this Assembly to redouble regional and international efforts so that we can find peaceful solutions to our disputes based on respect for international law and international humanitarian law and the fundamental principle of human dignity. We cannot accept any violation of the United Nations Charter or of the Security Council resolutions by any member state of this organization. Not in Ukraine, not in Gaza, not in Sudan, and not in any other part of the world. Ladies and gentlemen, rescuing multilateralism as a fundamental principle for the international system is an urgent necessity. And for each and every one of the nations that make up this forum, it's an unavoidable commitment if we really and sincerely want a future of peace and progress. Only with substantial reforms can we resume the path that we set out on when this organization was founded in 1945. A multipolar world needs new focuses which will be adapted to emerging needs of nations. We support the reform of the Security Council. Once again, it should resume a collective approach that is pacifist and democratic in the way it acts. It's not acceptable that decisions are not adopted in favor of peace because of the right exercised by the few. I'm referring to the right of veto. And with that, avoiding decisions being taken that are hard-hitting against those states which repeatedly violate the charter of this organization. Let us recall to the members of the Security Council that it is their primary responsibility to maintain international peace and international security, and that in the performance of its functions it must proceed according to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. Madam Vice President, Guatemala contributes as part of our commitment to peace with 213 officials, military observers and military staff in 7 of the United Nations peacekeeping missions. And this is a contribution which fills us with pride. Our professionalism and experience in this area have led us to be recognized internationally as one of the main countries to make the greatest contribution to peace in Latin America and the Caribbean. And I would like to share with this General Assembly that we are in the process of finalizing administrative steps to ensure our participation and deployment as a military police contingent in the multinational security support mission in Haiti, pursuant to Resolution 2699 of 2023 of the United Nations Security Council. Guatemala expresses its readiness to support all efforts aimed at re-establishing security and stability in Haiti, the first contemporary independent nation of this hemisphere, and with which we are unified. Together with all countries of the America, we share historic links of responsibility. We have known for a long time that an attack against human dignity in any part of the world is an attack against all of humanity. And that's why peace is such a global imperative. We can all make a contribution. We all must do our part. This is the idea that is at the heart and the existence of this organization. In the same way, this organization has the obligation to maintain and increase its cooperation to ensure the protection of migrants, displaced persons, people who, for political, social, or economic or environmental reasons, have taken their lives to other countries. Our government has committed to transforming the relationship between the state of Guatemala and Guatemalan citizens residing outside the country, because they continue to be an integral part of our nation, and their work is a fundamental part of our economy. We are doing this through a strategy that makes it possible for them to have effective participation in our national development, converting them into project partners in order to improve the living conditions for the families that have decided to remain in Guatemala. In the future that we are building, migration is a right, an option. It's not a sentence arising from the lack of opportunities, or from violence, or from hunger. Over the last decade, Guatemala has moved from being a country of origin for migrants and increasingly one of transit and return, and also to a lesser extent, a place of destination. Our commitment is to give dignified treatment to all people that arrive on our shores, consistent with the treatment that we demand for Guatemalans abroad. Our state is making substantial changes in the way that we protect and care for migrant persons. We have identified areas that need improvement and where we can offer greater opportunities in order to strengthen our management of migration flows, to ensure that it is orderly, regular and safe. It's my personal conviction, that of my government and of the broad majority of Guatemalans, that all migrants deserve to have the opportunity of a dignified life and to ensure that their fundamental rights are respected, irrespective of the causes that led them to migrate. For this reason, we firmly believe in the work that is being done through the United Nations system. Guatemala promotes the achievement of the 23 goals established in the Global Compact for Migration, for safe, orderly and regular migration, promoting international cooperation in the area of migration. With that same conviction, we welcomed 135 Nicaraguan brothers who were released from arbitrary detention by their government. Our commitment is that Guatemala will always be a space for dignity and freedom for those who come to our country, particularly for Central Americans who are, in accordance with our Constitution, our history, and are generally felt to be our people, fellow citizens and brothers and sisters. Guatemala reaffirms its commitment to the fundamental principles of democracy, such as those that are in the Inter-American Democratic Charter, and which is a basic fundamental principle of the political organization of our peoples. We reject in our hemisphere and throughout the world any attempt to suppress the aspirations for freedom and justice that are expressed by the peoples of the world through free and democratic processes, as we are seeing currently in Venezuela and Nicaragua. The principles of democracy are fundamental in order to preserve freedom, dignity, and inclusive and equitable prosperity for humanity. Madam Vice President, before this General Assembly, I would like to reaffirm the commitment of Guatemala to permanently and in a lasting manner resolve before the International Court of Justice the insular and maritime and territorial dispute with the brotherly country and neighbourly country of Belize. By opting for dialogue and the international legal mechanisms, we have demonstrated that peaceful means and respect for multilateral institutions are the most effective way to resolve disputes between countries. We are confident that this process will make it possible to bring about a just and lasting solution that respects the rights and dignity of both countries. This act is an act of faith, of our faith, in international law, and our commitment to lasting peace, not only for Guatemala and Belize, but also as an example for the region and for the world. Madam Vice President, the urgency of the challenge that we are facing suggests that we take concrete action and not just limit ourselves to rhetoric. It has been said very often that the time has now come to move from words to action. Conflicts and migration in Central America are fueled by what we consider to be the most pressing global challenge, namely the climate crisis. It is endangering our systems, our economy, our food chain, our survival itself. We are at a critical juncture for saving the current and future generations. Climate change is a devastating reality that is affecting humanity, which affects us today, but which will have disastrous consequences for the future. Guatemala, despite being a hugely diverse country, is extremely vulnerable to extreme climate events that cause natural disasters, flooding, landslides, fires, and an increase in temperatures that we have all been witness to this year. Our contribution to greenhouse gas emissions is minimal. Nevertheless, we, like few other countries, are suffering the onslaught of these extreme climate events. We are adapting ourselves to this reality and reducing the vulnerability of our country. In 2025, we will be presenting an update of our nationally determined contribution in fulfillment of the commitments established in the Paris Agreement. But we must recall here in this forum that the responsibility to address this crisis is a shared one. We have to act to resolve it, those that are suffering the onslaught of this crisis, but also those that have caused it. We issue an urgent call to the major powers to assume the leadership role that is theirs, as well as we appeal to the moral and financial responsibility with the nations, with the countries that have suffered the worst effects. The time to act is now, and it's essential that the next COP, COP29, to be held in Azerbaijan, be a success. The commitment of Guatemala to achieve this goal is total. Dear friends, Vice President, Guatemala is changing, and this change implies a transformation of our relationship with the world. We are doing what we can to contribute to the goals of this organization. And this contribution is born of a commitment to the norms and values of global peace and security. But also it comes from a democratic mandate that we have been given. Our people have the conviction that democracy is a necessary condition for progress and for well-being. Guatemala has an authoritarian past, and that's a very recent past, a tragic past that many of you will be aware of. Nevertheless, expressing our vocation for the freedom of our people, and with significant assistance from the international community, we have taken a turn towards promoting and defending human rights, earnestly confronting our historic problems and debts, and assuming courageously the responsibility to resolve the current problems that we have. The recent visit of the High Commissioner Volker Turk and the immediate renewal of the presence of his office in Guatemala are a testimony of this commitment. Guatemala has renewed its commitment to achieving the Sustainable Development Goals with the recent adoption of the Pact for the Future as part of the Summit of the Future. We are convinced that economic growth alone does not produce development. Cooperation, protection of the environment, social inclusion, respect for and the promotion of human dignity and security are indispensable preconditions for development. Guatemala is changing, and we are moving towards a future that is more equitable, where development and progress will reach every corner of the country, particularly the most abandoned sectors of the population, where everyone, irrespective of their origin, will have the possibility to build a dignified and full life. This is a natural aspiration of all peoples. We will do our part to bring this about in Guatemala, and we will work together to bring this about where it is needed. But we're doing this because we know that the world is changing. This change depends on our efforts as United Nations in this forum. It is unavoidable, and it is just beginning. It is for the well-being of our peoples and our nations. This is the vision that was at the heart of the foundation of this organization 79 years ago. This is the vision that should guide our efforts today as humanity. And I conclude quoting the sacred book of the Mayan people, the Popol Vuh, as follows: "Let everyone stand up and advance. Let no one be left behind." Thank you very much. On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank His Excellency President of the Republic of Guatemala. The Assembly will hear an address by Her Excellency Viola Amherd, President of the Swiss Confederation. I request protocol to escort Her Excellency and invite her to address the Assembly.
Madame la Vice-Présidente,
Madam Vice President, Deputy Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, on the morning of the 3rd of March 2002, I placed a ballot paper in the ballot box on which I had written a decisive yes. From early morning, figures and projections had already been displayed on TV screens, and yet it wasn't until the evening that the verdict was rendered. After a long and difficult struggle and a controversial election campaign, Switzerland was going to join the United Nations. In fact, ultimately it was just a few hundred votes in the Valais canton, my region of origin, that were the decisive ones. The Swiss people thus expressed the resolve of our country to shoulder its responsibilities and to participate in international politics in a spirit of solidarity. That was more than 2 decades ago. Today, I'm speaking to you just a few days away from the Swiss presidency of the Security Council. The world has changed, but not our principles. Like numerous other countries, Switzerland is increasingly concerned by worsening tensions throughout the world and the emergence of new conflicts. Unfortunately, we increasingly see gross violations of human rights and a complete disdain for internationally recognized borders. Might risks trumping the rule of law, and the use of force has considerably increased. It is only by standing together that we can confront this trend that the great writer Charles Ferdinand Ramus described so well a century ago. I quote, "Misfortune never comes alone. They get married and have children." Great challenges face us. Wars, disasters, harm that we inflict upon our own planet, and risks and opportunities as well linked to technological progress. The UN, as the only universal organization, is absolutely central in tackling these issues. Taking the decision to work together better, irrespective of political regimes, economic structures, and cultural differences, is already a good start. The world should not divide itself up into blocks. That means that we should be ready to negotiate with all major regions of the world based on the principles that are in the interest of all, respected by all. International law must always be the basis of this. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the quest for peace prevails over all else, and Switzerland is committed to this. Standing in solidarity, faithful to its tradition of good offices, and because giving up and inaction should never be an option, Switzerland this summer brought together about 100 countries and international organizations during the high-level Conference for Peace in Ukraine. Our aim was to give an initial push for a comprehensive, fair and lasting peace in Ukraine based on international law and the UN Charter. We would like to reiterate our invitation to the international community to spare no effort to support concrete measures and the joint communique. International law is the foundation underpinning our shared efforts for peace, security and prosperity in the world. The Geneva Conventions, whose 75th anniversary we are commemorating this year, govern the legal bases for war and thus the protection of civilians. Nonetheless, recent figures from the UN paint a bleak picture of the international community. Not only are people and civilian infrastructure insufficiently protected, but they are coming under repeated attack. We can see violations of international humanitarian law in Myanmar, in Ukraine, in the Middle East, and in Sudan. My country was firmly committed to ensure that the Security Council adopt ceasefire resolutions in Gaza and in Sudan in particular. There is an urgent need for these resolutions to be implemented and upheld. By the same token, we strongly call for an immediate return for complete cessation of hostilities on both sides of the blue line. The heavy price paid by civilians in these crises and in these conflicts currently makes Switzerland even more resolved to continue to view international humanitarian law as a top priority. Respecting it is at the heart of our commitment within the Security Council. The protection of civilians is not a given, and it is no way guaranteed. we should grant it more importance in situations of conflict. The best way of protecting civilians is and will always be peace. Along these lines, my country is investing in promoting civilian and military peace. Whilst some peacekeeping missions have not always achieved the aim set out, day after day they nonetheless contribute to keeping people safe and to stability and to peace. We need to overcome disagreements when we are deciding upon new missions. Peace is too precious to become a playground where individual interests play out. Standing alongside numerous international partners, Switzerland is making its contribution to promoting peace and strengthening its commitment where possible. Over and beyond matters pertaining to peace and conflict, numerous other challenges are of concern. We urgently need to address these. For several years now, it has become increasingly clear that civilians must be protected not only during armed conflicts, but also during natural disasters. Climate change and biodiversity loss have an existential impact on a growing number of people. It is crucial that we also maintain our commitment in these areas and that we bolster them and take brave, courageous measures for the future. Numerous international agreements on the environment or on climate change have not been implemented or have been done so insufficiently. This has led to a massive destruction of our environment. I'm also concerned by the uptick in disinformation. This undermines freedom of opinion based on facts. Private and state actors are spreading false information in their own countries and in other countries in order to deepen polarization, sow discord, and destabilize states. Switzerland is firmly committed to freedom of expression and to freedom of the media. Disinformation is a poison. We want to address this by better distinguishing between what comes under the rubric of freedom of expression and what is the manipulation of facts, by debunking illegitimate influence, by fostering open and fair debate, and by informing people transparently and objectively, both as governments and as international organisations. We can achieve this. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Switzerland is firmly committed to strong and effective multilateralism. I'm aware of the need for combined commitment from all states in order to find solutions together. My country stands out for its regular democratic debates at all levels of our country, within the municipalities, our regions, and at the confederation level. There is an urgent need to restore such a constructive and peaceful debate between states in order to tackle existential challenges. The day before yesterday, together we adopted the Pact for the Future. The Pact is a strong commitment to multilateralism. One of the key dimensions of this is the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. This is our roadmap, which we need to implement together as quickly as possible. The idea must be born of the vision, like the spark from the stone. Ramu also said this, and this quote still is relevant today. Let us be courageous and let us remain confident. We need a framework in which we can work together in partnership to find solutions. It is the United Nations which provides us with precisely this framework. It is up to us to make this institution stronger. Thank you very much.
Au nom de l'Assemblée,
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Swiss Confederation. The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Gustavo Petro Urrego, President of the Republic of Colombia. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
My
daughter, Antonella Penetro, has just sent me a paragraph, and she wanted me to begin my speech with that paragraph. So with your indulgence, I will read it. It is a paragraph written by a child of 15-16 years old, and it reads as follows. Today I am proud to appear before you as the President of the Heart of the Earth. That is how our indigenous people on the Sierra Nevada defined my beautiful country. Geographically speaking, what they said is logical, and it's logical that we call ourselves the heart of the world. However, if we are the heart, we have to set an example of unity, total peace, and preservation, conservation of nature. If a heart works and beats, that's a great step forward. However, all other parts of the human body are important. If one fails, the rest will follow. As such, from the heart of the earth, we now invite all countries to have their conscience piqued, to stand up and leave aside the greed that is killing human beings and Mother Earth. We invite you all to take a step towards total peace. My daughter is in those paragraphs. Those are her orders. Please take heed. Ladies and gentlemen, presidents of the world, in this very house, the ability of a president to communicate depends on how many dollars he has in his budget. It depends on how many warplanes he has. And ultimately, it depends on the clout that his country has and its ability to destroy humankind. The power of a country in the world is no longer exercised by the type of economic or political system it has or its ideology, but power is wielded according to how much capacity one has to destroy humankind. There is this power of destruction, but who are important are those who really have the power to sustain life. We speak, but we're often not listened to. And sometimes perhaps the only people listening to those of us that want to sustain life are our own peoples. That's why we're not listened to when we speak out for the genocide in Gaza to be detained, even though we do speak for the majority of the world and we represent vast swathes of humankind. However, nevertheless, we're not listened to. A small minority of presidents that are able to stop the bloodshed and but they're not listened to. And we're not listened to by the presidents that can destroy humankind. We ask them to swap debt for climate change spending, but we're not listened to. If we ask for war to stop so that we can concentrate on the expeditious transformation of the global economy so that we can save the very human species, we're not listened to either then. The power to destroy life is the power that allows voices to reverberate throughout the United Nations House, and it's that destructive power that gives convening power to representatives. The voice of nations is not heard when we ask humankind to unite to preserve existence. We speak here, but we're not listened to. However, perhaps we're not really speaking any longer to be listened to. We need to speak so that the peoples of the world are listening. That's now what we're interested in. In the last year, 11 million hectares on the Amazon jungle have been burned in only actually 1 month as a result of global warming and climate change. Scientists said that if we were to burn the Amazon rainforest, we would reach a point of no return in climate terms, where human decisions to halt the collapse of the climate would now have no effect whatsoever. Well, the Amazon rainforest is burning. Bells are already tolling for the whole planet. Bells are tolling for you, for us, for humankind and life. That was said by Ernest Hemingway, "The bell tolls for thee." Bells are not only tolling for you, but for all of life. The end has begun. A year ago, I called for a conference for peace on Palestine at this very rostrum. But the first bomb yet had not been dropped. Now 20,000 boys and girls have been killed under the bombs. And the presidents of the countries of human destruction are laughing in these very corridors with the help of mass media that today are the owners of major capital. They are reordering a world, and they're creating a world without democracy and without freedom. The democratic project of humankind is dying along with life, while at the same time racists, supremacists, those who stupidly believe that the Aryan race is the superior race are getting ready to dominate the world, brandishing the threat of bombs and terror over human beings. The control of humankind on the very foundations of barbarism is being built. And that is being played out in Gaza, Lebanon. When Gaza dies, humanity will die, the whole of humanity. The people of God was not the people of Israel, it would seem. It is not the people of the USA. Rather, the people of God is humankind as one. The children of Gaza, they were humankind, the chosen people of God. They are killing God's chosen people, the children of our very humankind. There is one reason for this contemporary Armageddon. In the senselessness of governments that applaud genocides, governments that don't act to change economies and decarbonize them. There is a logic behind all of this. It's not politics or this atrium where all presidents speak. That logic, that rationale lies outside, and it's called social inequality. Oxfam says that the richest 1% of humankind has more wealth than 95% of all humankind combined. It is in that level of inequality where the best of our history lies. That is where the logic of mass destruction lies. Destruction that's been unleashed by climate change, the logic of bombs. Netanyahu, as a criminal, is letting those bombs raise down on Gaza. Netanyahu is a hero for the richest 1% of humankind because he's able to demonstrate that people can destroy themselves with bombs. If wealth is measured in CO2 issued and not in dollars, we have the answer. The richest 1% of humankind is responsible for the climate change, which is gaining ground and is getting ready to destroy the world with oil and carbon, because that is how the world grows rich. The politicians, including the presidents of the most powerful countries of earth, quite simply obey them. They pay their campaigns. They are the owners of the means of communication, the global media. They are those who conceal the truth of science, like we see in the film Don't Look Up. They are the people who decide what is thought, what is said, what should be forbidden, and what should be silenced. In their power to prohibit and to ban, they scream, "Long live liberty!" But what they're talking about is nothing more than the freedom of the global 1%. They are obsessed with the free market, and that obsession brings us to the destruction of life and our atmosphere. The free market wasn't freedom, as they claimed it would be. Rather, what it meant was the maximization of death. The richest 1% of humankind is the powerful global oligarchy. They are the people who allow us to drop bombs on women, elderly people, and the children of Gaza, Lebanon, or Sudan. They impose economic blockades on rebel countries, countries that don't yield to their domination, Cuba, Venezuela, because they need to demonstrate their destructive capacity to the remaining 99% of humankind, so that they let them continue to wield power, continue to grow their wealth, and continue to tighten their control. This oligarchy is bringing humankind to the very brink of its own destruction. Politics just nods its head at them. They ignore the fact that people need freedom, people have power. They ignore the idea of democracy. The question we need to ask from this rostrum is, will the people allow this to continue? There is no more time to waste. Governments are incapable of halting the extinction of human life. Life indeed. Today we need to choose between life or greed, between humankind or capital. All I can say to the people of the world, as a representative of a country without weapons of mass destruction, without dollars, but a country that is beautiful in its biodiversity and cultural wealth, a country that's the country of butterflies of all colours, all I can say to you that now is not the moment for governments, it's the time of our people. Time has run out. Let us fly the flag of life, or our people will fill up mass graves. This was revealed to us by the epidemic. The time has come for people to act. Local action needs to be taken. Globally, we need to come together. Fossil fuel capital cannot continue. People must stop the rising tide of capital. The poison thrown into the atmosphere is lethal, and the chimneys that belch it out must be plugged. Every corner of the world can be a battle against those chimneys. A century ago, we raised a red flag that was held by the hands of the workers of the world. They talked about a revolution against capital. This world has ended. It is no more. It was lost in the largeness, the enormity of states. The red flag could no longer find a place in the history of humankind. However, today, we no longer need to defend a class, a system of ideas, but we need to defend life as a whole. And with that goal in mind, we need to lift up another flag, maybe not a red flag, but a flag of all colours, a flag of the colours of all of humankind. That's why that flag needs to be lifted once more, so that our existence on Mother Earth can be protected. There is the world's word, socialism. Today it has a new meaning. The brains that are really behind our work are today more connected now than ever before. Human knowledge is more collective than ever before. Let us always revive that magic, that thinking that has allowed us to survive. Individuals are weak alone, and they'll end up being taken over by fentanyl and defeat if they act individually. People are strong if they help each other, and this mutual assistance can mean that we can go global. Mutual assistance, collectively building knowledge, humankind as a new political subject, all of that is the basis by which we give new meaning to the word socialism. We are more advanced than we've ever been. We are at the forefront of intelligent life. Intelligent life must defend itself and defend other lives from a global oligarchy who wields its weapons to destroy that life. New wealth needs to be built, wealth no longer based on oil. but rather on the intensity of free creative work that itself will produce and will allow us make progress even with AI. But that AI does need to be controlled at a global level with public power. Productivity allows us to have creative free time. It allows human brains to come together. And coming together, human brains can achieve more. That network of humanity's neurons is what will allow us to vanquish with our flag held high. That is the flag of life. Now, I'm not really talking to Biden, Macron, Schultz, Xi Jinping, or Putin. But from China, I have the idea of a dialogue between civilizations. From Europe, I've taken the idea of its social compact. From the United States, I've taken its love of its original democracy, the democracy of its founding fathers. From South America, I've taken its diversity. It's jockey on a horse. It's Simon Bolivar. From Africa, I've taken their drums, the drums that summon us to communicate with the spirits of nature. Jesus. From Jesus, I've taken the idea of universal love, light giving life. I've taken all of these civilizational forces that lie within all the peoples of the world. We need to bring them together and draw from them the strength that we need to wage the greatest battle in humankind's history. That battle is, and about this there can be no doubt, a global revolution. We need to build the largest army ever seen, with spaces for warriors for life, men and women. This global army for life will not have weapons from the global oligarchy. It will not have nuclear weapons. It will not compete for weapons. Neither will it have the full coffers and vaults of banks. Neither will it have the power to destroy children in the genocides waged by oligarchies, but it will have the greatest power of us all. That is the power of a humankind that is united and will not allow its very existence to be torn from it. There is only one. There have been millions and millions of light years, and there's only one point we can see in the black universe. That is Earth. There is human life, intelligent life, humankind. We can't let that one light in the universe go out. Without life, all we'll have is inert darkness. And that inert darkness is what fills the hearts and soul of the global oligarchy and its idols. It is now up to humankind to wage a battle. The time has come for the people. If the governments were not able, as has been made patently clear here, to work, and they decided to drop bombs, wage senseless wars, kill boys and girls, play games of power, well, if that's what they chose to do, now what we need to do is solve humankind's problem by putting them in the very hands of the people themselves, the simple, noble people of humankind. Instead of speaking to governing officials that heed nothing that we say, let us speak to ourselves as people. Let us address people so that together we can work to demonstrate that there is another democratic power, that there is the power that humankind has, and that power can spark a new conscience to itself, produce new governments and new leaders. If life manages to triumph over its very extinction, it won't be the global oligarchy that's governing the world. That oligarchy will be defeated to allow for the building of a global democracy. A new story is about to begin. Thank you for your kind attention. I thank, on behalf of the General Assembly, the President of the Republic of Colombia. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, Emir of the State of Qatar. I request protocol to escort His Highness and I invite him to address the Assembly.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
In the name of God, the merciful, the compassionate. Excellencies, may the peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you. At the outset, I would like to congratulate His Excellency Mr. Philemon Young on assuming the presidency of the 79th session of the General Assembly, wishing him every success in his tasks. I express appreciation to His Excellency Mr. Dennis Francis for his efforts during his presidency of the previous session, and we commend the prominent role played by His Excellency Mr. Antonio Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, in strengthening its role and achieving its lofty goals. Mr. President, the blatant aggression that befalls the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip today is the most barbaric, heinous, and extensive aggression violating human values, international conventions, and norms. This is not a war within the international relations well-known and common concept of war, but rather it is a crime of genocide by means of the most sophisticated weapons against the people besieged in a detention camp where there is no escape from the barrage of aerial bombing. Resolutions, condemnations, and reports have been exhausted. Nothing is left except the undeterred, ongoing, and premeditated stark crime with children, women, and the elderly as their victims. We oppose violence and the targeting of innocent civilians by any party. But after a year of this war, and with all that has taken place and that continues to take place, it is no longer tenable to talk about Israel's right to defend itself in this context without being complicit in justifying the crime. It is no longer plausible for any official to claim that they do not know. The facts are well known, and reports issued by international organizations about the bombing of schools and hospitals, weaponizing access to food and medicine, in addition to the published and publicly uttered intentions of Israeli leaders. Therefore, the failure to intervene to stop the aggression is a major scandal. Ladies and gentlemen, every year I stand on this podium and I begin by talking about the Palestinian cause, the absence of justice, the perils of believing that it can be neglected, and the illusions of making peace without a just solution to the Palestinian cause. I have done so every year at a time when the Palestinian cause has become absent from the speeches of major powers' representatives in our world. There are those who are tempted by the possibility of marginalizing this issue to get rid of its burden or seeing it vanished without resolving it. But the Palestinian cause is resistant to marginalization because it is an issue of indigenous people on their own land, a people who are subjected to a settler colonial occupation. This occupation has taken the form of an apartheid system in the 21st century. Can this be overlooked? The Palestinian cause will remain in place, except in two cases, either the end of the occupation or the disappearance of the Palestinian people. It seems there are those in Israel who entertain wishful thinking to eliminate the Palestinian people. The ongoing Israeli aggression for nearly a year is nothing but a result of the absence of a sincere political will, a deliberate international failure to resolve the Palestinian issue with a just solution, and insistence of the occupying Israeli authorities to impose a fait accompli on the Palestinians and the world with all types of force. The ongoing brutal war has fired the coup de grace at international legitimacy and inflicted serious damage on the credibility of the post-World War II concepts on which the international community was founded. as if the dire consequences of this approach, which are visible before our very eyes, are not enough to prove that ignoring a just solution is conducive to disaster. We discover, to our disbelief, that some are still trying to find innovative measures to run Gaza after the war, with or without an authority, only on the basis of security considerations. And what is meant, of course, is the security of the occupation, not the security of those languishing under the occupation. It is the same mindset that led from one disaster to another. It is the approach that wants to tailor the entire region to fit Israel, while looking for circumventions to avoid ending the occupation and work on imposing the rule of one people over another by force. Is it reasonable that even after this disaster, the major countries with the ability to influence the course of events are unable to reach a conclusion of the necessity to stop the war and pivot towards a just solution immediately instead of innovatively working on formulations to evade it? The end of the occupation and the Palestinian people exercising their right to self-determination is neither a favor nor a gift from anyone. Unfortunately, the Security Council has failed to implement its ceasefire resolution in the Gaza Strip and to refrain from granting the State of Palestine full membership status in the United Nations, despite the fact that the General Assembly adopted a resolution last May supporting Palestine's request for UN membership. The State of Palestine's full UN membership neither establishes its sovereignty nor ends the occupation, but at least it sends a message to the far-right government involved in challenging international legitimacy. That force does not eliminate rights. Talking about such a step harming the peace process is simply eyewash, because there is no Israeli partner for peace during the current government's tenure. No peace process is taking place, but rather there's a genocide. In this regard, we highly value the position of countries that recognize the State of Palestine based on 1967 borders. The continuation of the humanitarian tragedy of the brotherly Palestinian people for more than 7.5 decades, this is a shameful stain on the conscience of the international community and its institutions. There is no point in talking about security, peace, and stability in the Middle East region and across the world if not backed by concrete steps leading to an immediate ceasefire and an end to the Israeli occupation of all Arab territories. Ladies and gentlemen, it is no secret that we are facing a humanitarian catastrophe in Gaza and other Palestinian territories, which are subjected to coordinated attacks by the occupation army and settlers in an attempt to enforce plans to expand settlements, annex the West Bank, and Judaize Jerusalem. The international community bears the responsibility for the consequences of what is happening to the brotherly Palestinian people. The Palestinian people are subjected to unfolding genocidal war that has resulted so far in the death of more than 41,000 martyrs, let alone the missing under the rubble, including 17,000 children, 11,000 women, 100,000 wounded, and thousands of disabled and millions of people forcibly displaced several times, in addition to the complete destruction of the infrastructure of hospitals, schools, and buildings, including mosques and churches. A whole society is being destroyed in the course of the genocide against segments of the Palestinian people. It is the Gazan Palestinian community that has retained its composure and achieved remarkable development levels amid more than 17-year-old stifling siege. Mr. President, the State of Qatar has opted for undertaking mediation efforts in an endeavor to stop the aggression on Gaza and secure the release of prisoners and detainees. It is a mediation amidst fierce war and complex circumstances during which one party would not hesitate to assassinate counterpart political leaders with whom it negotiates, such as the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh, who many people feign forgetfulness that he was not only the political leader of Hamas, but also the first elected Palestinian prime minister. For us, mediation and humanitarian work are both a strategic political choice at the regional and international levels and a humanitarian duty before being a political one. We're not being boastful. Our mediation efforts in partnership with the Arab Republic of Egypt and the United States of America culminated in a humanitarian agreement last November. It resulted in a brief ceasefire in the Gaza Strip, the release of 240 Palestinian prisoners and 109 of the detainees in Gaza. It increased the flow of relief shipments. We also provided humanitarian support to the civilian population in the Gaza Strip and contributed to evacuating the wounded and the sick. We supported humanitarian initiatives to deliver aid through all accessible routes. We increased our support to UNRWA, an irreplaceable international agency whose services are indispensable and which has been subjected to defamation for political purposes related to the Israeli government's desire to eliminate the refugee crisis without resolving the Palestinian cause. The State of Qatar will spare no effort to provide various forms of humanitarian assistance to the brotherly Palestinian people until this crisis is resolved. Despite the daunting challenges, obstruction attempts, and the aspersions we are subjected to, we will continue our efforts of mediation to resolve the disputes through peaceful means, as we are cognizant that any dispute will never lack a force interested in its continuation, while being skeptical of any mediation regardless of the intentions. We will continue to make every effort with our partners until we reach a permanent ceasefire, secure the release of prisoners and detainees, take the path of a just solution in accordance with the resolutions of the international legitimacy and the Arab Peace Initiative, to enable the Palestinian people to obtain all their legitimate rights, foremost of which their independent state with East Jerusalem as its capital on the 1967 borders. The establishment of an independent Palestinian state within a just and permanent solution is in the interest of the Israeli and Palestinian peoples. We will not achieve this goal except with a serious partner who is aware of the importance of renouncing discord and ending the occupation and all forms of aggression so that we can reach together the desired peace in the Middle East. Mr. President, apart from committing a major crime by rigging wireless communication devices and exploding them simultaneously across thousands of people with total disregard for their identity or location, Israel is currently waging a war on Lebanon, and no one knows to what extent this war could escalate. This is what we have repeatedly warned against. If the brutal war on Gaza does not end, this systematic destructive war must stop. And this is the choice before Israel, as its leaders know very well. They know that it will neither bring security nor peace to northern Israel nor to Lebanon, and that the key to security rests on a just peace. Stop the aggression on Gaza. Stop the war on Lebanon. In brotherly Yemen, we look forward to preserving the 2022 truce and proceeding therefrom towards a comprehensive ceasefire, resolving the crisis, ensuring Yemen's unity, and achieving the aspirations of its brotherly people through negotiations between the Yemeni parties based on the outcomes of the national dialogue, the Gulf Initiative, and relevant Security Council resolutions. As regards to the crisis in Syria, and since the beginning of the crisis, the position of the State of Qatar has been clear. and that is that Qatar is keen on the interest of brotherly Syrian people, hoping that the parties and countries involved in the crisis will be convinced of the necessity for dialogue and understanding to end this crisis in accordance with the Geneva Declaration 1 and Security Council Resolution 2254 in a way that will achieve the aspirations of the Syrian people and preserve Syria's unity, sovereignty, and independence. Regarding the Sudanese issue, we call on all the Sudanese parties to stop the fighting, and we reaffirm our support for all regional and international efforts to end this crisis in a way that will ensure the unity of state institutions and the sovereignty and stability of Sudan. In Libya, we support the political trajectory and the implementation of Security Council resolutions, and we urge all parties to recourse to dialogue and overcome differences in order to complete the comprehensive national reconciliation, preserve the progress and gains achieved on the security, political, and economic tracks, and unify state institutions. Arab countries cannot achieve security and stability without the existence of firmly established states capable of legislating and enforcing the law, developing and implementing national policies. No state can firmly be established and be stable in the presence of armed factions that are not under its control. These are self-evident and unquestionable matters. Ladies and gentlemen, the war between Russia and Ukraine has caused great human suffering and left repercussions on Europe and the world. We reiterate our call on all parties to implement the provisions of the Charter of the United Nations and the rules of international law to seek to find a peaceful solution as the only possible solution. In this context, and based on our firm belief in the principle of peaceful settlement of disputes, we have made a tangible contribution over the past year as Qatari mediation led to prisoner swap between the United States and Venezuela. And dozens of Ukrainian children were reunited with their families after being separated by the war. Finally, we affirm that the State of Qatar will spare no effort in working with its international partners and the United Nations to firmly consolidate the pillars of peace, security, sustainable development, human rights, and the rule of law at all levels, and to address global challenges in order to achieve a better future for all. Thank you, and may the peace, mercy, and blessings of God be upon you.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Emir of the State of Qatar. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Matamela Cyril Ramaphosa, President of the Republic of South Africa. I request protocol to escort His Excellency. I invite him to address the Assembly.
Thank you, Your Excellency, the Chair of the Assembly. We take this opportunity to thank the United Nations Assembly to give us a chance to speak. 30 years ago, South Africa was born as a new nation, equal, united, and free from apartheid. We adopted a new constitution as the birth certificate of our new nation. Our first democratic elections brought the tyranny of apartheid to an end, a system that this General Assembly had declared to be a crime against humanity. In adopting Resolution 2202A in 1966, as later endorsed by the Security Council in 1985, the United Nations was a beacon of hope in our quest for justice. The great wave of solidarity of the peoples of the world, led by the United Nations, turned the tide against apartheid. Today, democracy flourishes in South Africa. We have a progressive constitution, an entrenched human rights culture, and strong institutions. We have laws to advance equality and programs to protect society's most marginalized and vulnerable. We continue to transform our economy so that it is in a more competitive position to create jobs, to attract more investment, and that it should benefit all. South Africa is a party to global treaties on human rights, gender equality, children's rights, refugee protection, and environmental protection. A few days ago, South Africa also endorsed the pact that charts the course for a better future for global governance and towards the attainment of the Sustainable Development Goals. As signatory to the Paris Agreement, we are contributing our fair share towards the global effort and have a just energy transition plan to guide our carbon journey and climate resilient development. Through the African Union, we are working to advance Agenda 2063. We are involved in mediation and conflict resolution across our continent and actively contribute to peacekeeping missions. Our political culture has evolved and it continues to mature. We have just held our 7th free and fair general elections since our democracy, paving the way for the formation of the government of national unity. 10 political parties have coalesced around a common agenda for economic growth, job creation, poverty eradication, and sustainable development. South Africa is in a new era, an era of great promise. In what some have called our second miracle, South Africans of all races have rallied behind the government of national unity. We are making headway in resolving some of our most pressing challenges. Our economy has started to improve, and investor confidence is on the rise. Our country's prospects look bright, and we look to the future with great hope. The South African story bears witness to the enduring role of the United Nations in global matters. In supporting our struggle, the United Nations affirmed the principles of the UN Charter, the fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of every person, and the equal rights of nations, large and small. It affirmed the aspiration contained in the Universal Declaration of Rights that we should strive for a world free of barbarous acts that outrage the conscience of humankind. Genocide was declared to be a stain on the conscience of the world, and the world community took a stand against genocide. Apartheid was declared a crime against humanity and a stain on the conscience of the world. The United Nations took a stand against apartheid. These were seen as crimes against humanity then, and they continue to be crimes against humanity now. It has been 11 months since the Hamas attack that killed 1,200 people and where hostages were taken. As South Africa, we have condemned this attack. In response, Israel embarked on an act of collective punishment in its assault on the people of Gaza. The torment of the people of Gaza continues unabated. More than 41,000 Palestinians have been killed. Homes, hospitals, churches, mosques, and schools lie destroyed. Famine and disease stalk the streets of Gaza. This cannot but shock our collective humanity. The violence the Palestinian people are being subjected to is a grim continuation of more than half a century of apartheid that has been perpetrated against Palestinians by Israel. We South Africans know what apartheid looks like. We lived through apartheid. We suffered and died under apartheid. We will not remain silent and watch as apartheid is perpetrated against others. Through the United Nations and the instruments it wields, we must end the suffering that Palestinians are being subjected to. We are called upon to uphold the principles of the UN Charter and to uphold consistently and in their entirety the fundamental tenets of international law. International law cannot be applied selectively. No one state is more equal than any other. In December last year, South Africa approached the International Court of Justice, seeking an order to prevent Israel from committing genocide against the people of Gaza. We did so in terms of our obligations as a state party to the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. As South Africa, we welcome the support that a number of countries have given to the case that we have launched at the ICJ. The ICJ's orders make it clear that there is a plausible case of genocide against the people of Gaza. They further make it clear that states must also act to prevent genocide by Israel and to ensure that they are not themselves party to the violation of the Genocide Convention by aiding or assisting in the commission of genocide. We reiterate our call for an immediate ceasefire and for the release of all hostages. The only lasting solution is the establishment of a Palestinian state, a state that will exist side by side with Israel, with East Jerusalem as its capital. Our moral conscience further demands that we exert every effort to bring peace also to other countries, especially the eastern part of the Democratic Republic of the Congo, to Sudan, to Ukraine, and other parts of the African continent. We must realize the aspirations of the people of Western Sahara to self-determination. Achieving and maintaining peace and security requires the collective will of the community of nations gathered here. It requires that the UN Security Council should be a more representative body and inclusive. 78 years since its formation, the structure of the United Nations Security Council remains largely unchanged. Africa and its 1.4 billion people remain excluded from its key decision-making structures. This cannot continue. The Security Council has not fulfilled its mandate to maintain international peace and security. The UN Security Council must be reformed as a matter of agency. We would like to see the Security Council being more inclusive so that the voices of all nations can be heard and be considered. It cannot remain an exclusive club of just 5 nations to the exclusion of the many nations in the world. Africa stands ready to play its role in building a safer global order by participating in the work of the UN Security Council on the basis of respect and acceptance. The African Union and its member states are engaged in mediation, in dialogue and diplomacy across our continent to create conditions under which peace and development can take hold. There must be greater collaboration between the United Nations and the African Union towards resolving a number of conflicts and also in addressing the root causes of conflicts that continue to rage. Pandemics and endemics pose a serious threat to us all. We are concerned by the spread of mpox across the world and in Africa in particular. We urge the international community to mobilize vaccines and other medical countermeasures for deployment where they are most needed. Economic prosperity is key to sustainable peace. Through the Africa Continental Free Trade Area, we are establishing the foundation for a massive increase in trade and investment and infrastructure in our continent. The AFCFTA will further integrate regional economies and accelerate Africa's industrialization and economic growth. The climate crisis is now a full-blown climate emergency in the world. It impacts very devastatingly to both countries and citizens of many countries. Extreme weather, such as flooding, fires, and droughts, are becoming wreaking havoc on societies, economies, and the livelihoods of ordinary people. Despite being least responsible for climate change, developing economy countries, and particularly African countries, are bearing the brunt of what they did not create and are in the front line. As South Africa, we remain committed to contributing our fair share to reduce global emissions, guided by the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. We have adaptation and mitigation programs and policies in place and have passed a climate change law to further support our emissions reduction targets. It is essential that climate actions do not deepen global inequality or stifle the developmental aspirations of the Global South. The industrialized nations are not honoring their climate commitments, and we repeat the call for predictable and sustainable financing for climate action. We must operationalize the agreed-upon climate financing and capacity-building instruments to advance mitigation and adaptation. Pursuing sustainable development necessitates that those with greater means should support those who lack them. The world faces annual financing gap of some $4 trillion to achieve sustainable development. We call on better resourced countries to scale up their levels of support to developing economy countries. Debt is the millstone around the neck of many developing economy countries, stifling their potential and development. Debt servicing is robbing a number of countries of much-needed funds to support health, education, and social spending. South Africa endorses the United Nations Secretary General's call for the reform of the global financial architecture to enable developing economy countries to lift themselves out of the quicksand of debt. We must commit to systems for financing development that are more accessible, agile, and equitable. In 2025, South Africa will assume the presidency of the G20. We will use this important role to advocate for the peoples of Africa and all of the Global South, for their development and advancement. South Africa welcomes the adoption of the Pact for the Future and congratulate our sister country, Namibia, as well as for the Federal Republic of Germany for having ably steered the United Nations towards the adoption of the resolution in this regard. This Pact of the Future is a platform for us to focus on those actions we need to take together to build a world in which the equal worth of every person and the equal worth of every country is recognized and valued. We particularly welcome the commitments to place poverty eradication at the center of all our efforts, and for the Sustainable Development Goals financing gap in developing countries to be closed. The disparities in wealth and development within and between countries is simply unjust and unsustainable. We must continue to strive for equal treatment, for equal opportunity and advancement for all individuals and all nations. The Pact for the Future must reinvigorate international solidarity. Like veins that carry sustenance to every part of the body, solidarity is the lifeblood of human progress. It binds us together to nourish the greater good. It is achieving the greater good for the common good to which we all strive. Through dialogue, through respect for the rule of law, through the advancement of human rights, through cooperation and solidarity, we can and we will be able to achieve a better world for all the peoples of the world. I thank you.
Agradezco.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of South Africa. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Mohamed Muisu, President of the Republic of Maldives. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Mr. President, Mr. Secretary General, Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. Mr. President, congratulations on the assumption of your presidency of the General Assembly. Our appreciation also to your predecessor for his strong leadership. We extend our gratitude to the Secretary General for his tireless efforts in steering the Secretariat. We gather here today at a delicate moment in the world history. Let's not mince our words today. Humanity is in deep trouble, facing an ever-growing list of crises: conflict, poverty, hunger, climate change, the wealth gap, the cost of living crisis, migration, occupation, opioid addiction. The list goes on and on and on. In fact, I have a map here of the world with countries which are facing some sort of crisis in red. Do you see any countries in green who are not facing any crisis? Do you know why? Because we are all deep in the red. Humanity is in crisis, and in many cases it's man-made. But we look the other way, continuing with business as usual. While the alarms are ringing, the band is still playing the same old tunes as the whole ship descends deeper and deeper into uncharted waters. We need nations united in harmony, not united nations in misery. These are crucial times for the world, important years for my country. In 2040, the Maldives will celebrate 75 years regaining its independence. 75 years as a sovereign nation. As we look forward to that milestone in our nation's life, what we can hope to achieve? What do we wish to accomplish? And is the world ready to play its part? I took office as the President of Maldives last November, duty-bound by the aspirations of my people, the same aspirations I hold dear to my heart, not just for the present, but for the future too. Today, I'm here at the United Nations with a vision of where I want to take my country. By 2040, I wish to see the Maldives as a full-fledged developed nation, a nation that commands respect, is relevant, and one that embodies resilience, a society that is inclusive and just, a country that exemplifies sustainability and democratic governance. Destiny is not mere fate. It is a consequence of the many choices we make, the many decisions we take, and the many hours we work. Becoming a developed nation may seem like a daunting task and a distant possibility, but I can tell you this, with a goal in sight and a plan in hand, it is achievable, because prevailing and even flourishing against formidable odds is nothing new for the Maldivians. In 1965, when we regained independence, we were among the poorest countries in the world. 1/3 of our population was illiterate. More than 1 out of every 10 babies were dying before their first birthday. We had no industries, barely any exports, and even fewer prospects. And in just 5 decades, we have reached upper middle income status. a feat we are incredibly proud of. I believe the Maldives can become a developed country by investing in the country's productive capacity and increasing its productivity, by transforming our economy into one that is fully digitized and driven by artificial intelligence, and most importantly, by leveraging the natural beauty and marine resources of our country. Boosting productivity will be the key to economic transformation. This we will do by reforming and strengthening our institutions, increasing our state capacity, and leveraging the private sector. We will also identify and implement policies that support investments in key sectors, such as the digital economy. The Maldives has over 1,100 islands spread across 90,000 square kilometers. Enhancing digital connectivity is key to achieving inclusive development, mobilizing economic activity, and fostering a more diversified and resilient economy. We believe the future is intelligence-driven. This is why we are working towards a digital economy that can contribute up to 15% of our GDP by 2030. This can be achieved through investing in our ICT infrastructure. We are using and expanding artificial intelligence systems to deliver essential services such as healthcare, education, and social welfare. We are also delving into cutting-edge applications of 5G technology, using drones for medical supplies, delivery and implementing smart road systems, and using AI-enhanced technology for erosion detection and environmental monitoring. The transformation can be sustainable only if we transform our education and financial systems. We need to invest in digital literacy from a young age, to build a generation that can use artificial intelligence to enhance public service delivery, build new products, and successfully compete in the global digital economy. We need to bridge the digital divide within the country, including through improving data collection and utilization. We need to strengthen the regulatory frameworks, strengthening existing institutions, cultivating startup ecosystems, and providing the impetus for the future we envision. Becoming a developed country will also require fostering new industries. This is why we are also working on building a robust financial sector in the Maldives. With this in mind, in May this year, I set up the Development Bank of Maldives with a focus on improving and investing in economic diversification. The result we desire is inclusive development, where equality of access to opportunities is guaranteed, where women and young people play key players in development, not mere spectators, and where every Maldivian citizen has adequate housing. To support objectives, my government has launched $6.5 million loan facility. It's specifically for women entrepreneurs, of which 25% is allocated to those with disabilities. In the first phase, over 100 projects will be funded across 19 of the 20 atolls and Mali, and across 21 business activities. I have also recently launched a Presidential Youth Advisory Board. This board will advise and inform me directly on the needs and views of young people. Inclusivity is at the heart of one of the most ambitious large-scale urban development projects in the country's history, Ras Mali. This is my promise to the Maldivian people, a solution to alleviate the long-term housing crisis, an urban oasis where citizens can fully participate in all aspects of city life. Ras Mali will utilize modular housing, leverage a state-of-the-art transportation system that is accessible to all. It will be developed as a climate-resilient and safe island. Tourism drives the Maldivian economy. My vision is to expand the tourism sector further. This means building complementary industries centered around innovation and creativity. This means more sustainable and construction practices emphasizing on green and sustainable tourism. We are also expanding our main international airport, our air connectivity, and the fleet of our national airline. These steps will support the expansion of the tourism sector and at the same time generate more revenue for the country. But tourism is also highly vulnerable to external shocks, conflicts, calamities, and causes beyond our control, can and have had far-reaching critical implications in the past. We need the international system to anticipate and address these threats, threats such as armed conflicts, terrorism, violent extremism, transnational organized crime, climate change, ocean degradation, crimes that transcend national borders. Part of addressing these threats is to safeguard and protect people's fundamental rights. In 2015, the world came together to endorse humanity's fundamental rights by committing to the Sustainable Development Goals, or SDGs. But 6 years to the SDGs deadline, we are only on track in less than a fifth of those targets. In June, this organization, the UN, issued a report saying the world is failing to deliver on Sustainable Development Goals. This week, we agreed on a pact for the future. But do we want this document, the pact, to go the same way as this one, the 2015 SDG commitments? I'm sorry, but we can't keep doing this. We can't keep meeting, talking, pledging, but not doing. We don't want these days to come back to haunt us. The days when we had a chance but not a will. We believe the best approach to protecting fundamental rights is to cultivate a culture of respect. This requires support. The Maldives has a good track record of treaty ratification, implementation, and reporting. We champion the right to environment because we are keenly aware of the consequences of environmental degradation. We also believe that violation of a right by any country, large or small, rich or poor, with powerful friends or not, must not be tolerated. This is why the ongoing massacre, the genocide by Israel in Gaza, is a travesty of justice and the international system. The repeated destruction of homes, hospitals, schools, humanitarian infrastructure, the repeated cycles of killing of men, women, children, babies, thousands upon thousands. The world is struggling to process the deaths of so many civilians in Gaza, and now Israel raids Lebanon, claiming hundreds more civilian lives there. Their cries haunt anyone with humanity. Their tears bitter our conscience. Israel's targeting of journalists, the eyes and ears of humanity, the killing of journalists, Palestinian journalists, Lebanese journalists, Al Jazeera journalists, the closure of Al Jazeera officers. How can we interpret this as anything other than brutal attempts to prevent the world from knowing about the crimes taking place? Israel must be held accountable for these acts of terrorism, for these violations of international law and UN resolutions. We must accept a sovereign and independent Palestinian state on the pre-1967 borders, with East Jerusalem as its capital. We welcome the decision to seat our brothers and sisters from Palestine with us here in the General Assembly for the first time, instead of behind us. Now we must ensure that Palestine becomes a full member of the UN. Mr. President, Mr. President, the Maldives is gearing up for an economic transformation that will change lives. But our policies can deliver the results only with sufficient international financial support. The Maldives has always taken ownership and responsibility for its own development. While we have received extensive support towards our development, we urge the multilateral development funds, banks, and bilateral donors to view us as your partners, not just as recipients of aid, to stop looking at our inherent vulnerabilities as limitations, to adopt tailor-made approaches which are mutually beneficial, to reduce the cost of borrowing, to make the financial system work for us, not penalize us, to make your terms flexible, your financing less rigid, to make your lending targeted, affordable, and responsible. Mr. President, Climate change is the most serious threat to our world, the defining challenge of our generation. It's washing away decades of progress in mere minutes. It's diverting already depleted resources of long-term development to emergency relief and reconstruction, preventing countries from adapting to climate impact. And the vicious cycle continues. The Maldives has always walked the talk. We are investing in renewable energy. Our goal is to have 33% of the country's electricity demand from renewable energy sources by 2028. On behalf of the Maldivian people, I implore you, do your part, act now. We must face the climate emergency head on, with science, determination, and resources. The rich and emitting countries need to meet the financial pledges already made, especially on adaptation, where the financing gap continues to widen. As we work towards COP29, we must ensure the new goal on climate finance matches the level of climate action required. This means the new goal must go beyond the $100 billion. It must include as a minimum loss and damage response, mitigation and adaptation as sub-goals. One of the biggest victims of the climate crisis is the ocean. The Maldivian people and their livelihoods are dependent on the health and wealth of the ocean. We need to step up efforts to sustainably use and manage our ocean resources, address plastic pollution, conserve biodiversity, and protect endangered species. This morning I ratified the Global Ocean Treaty. We urge you all to do the same. We urge you to do your part to address climate change, overcome pollution, and reverse biodiversity loss. The transformation the Maldives seeks cannot be achieved without an enabling global environment. Small countries like mine need a multilateral system that champions us and delivers for us. The United Nations is the epitome of the multilateral system. It is well positioned to promote sustainable development, to maintain peace and security, to promote and protect human rights, to enforce equality, the rule of law, inclusivity, and representativeness. But what we are witnessing is the opposite. Inability to stop climate change and environmental degradation, inability to stop war and genocide, inability to stop exploitation and suffering, inability to stop unequal representation. Hence, the United Nations needs reform and revitalization. It needs to be representative. The Maldives cannot and will not watch and stand idle while the multilateral system fails, because our development, our advancement, and our survival is tethered to the world. That's why the Maldives is seeking to get elected to the Economic and Social Council for the 2027 to 2029 term. We count on your support. If elected, the Maldives will strive to make the UN development system more relevant to our times, continuously recalibrating and adjusting, utilizing the latest science and evidence, listening to the variety of opinions and views. The United Nations must enforce its decisions across the UN system and at local level. The United Nations is only relevant when it makes a real difference in our lives. Mr. President, 59 years ago, the Maldives reached out to the United Nations as its first port in a sea of uncertainty. We came here to this great hall, seeking recognition, seeking a partner. We came to you as a poor and impoverished country, but with a vision of prosperity, a vision which we made great progress with your support. Today, once again, we come to you aiming higher, to reach further, and to do better, with a vision to make the Maldives a developed nation by 2040. For I believe development is destiny, and our destiny beckons towards a brighter future for the present and future generations. I thank you.
En nombre de la Asamblea, agradezco al presidente de la...
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the President of the Republic of Maldives. The Assembly will now hear an address by His Excellency Emomali Rahmon, President of the Republic of Tajikistan. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly.
Honourable President, Excellency Secretary General, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I at the onset extend my warm words of congratulation to His Excellency Mr. Philemon Yan on his election as the President of the 79th session of the United Nations General Assembly. My heartfelt thanks also go out to His Excellency Mr. Danis Francis in recognition of his fruitful engagement as the President of the 78th session of the United Nations General Assembly. Distinguished delegates, today the world is facing up to a turbulent and intricate situation. The controversial geopolitical process, rapid weaponization, escalation of the Cold War, armed conflicts, aftermath of climate change and other global jeopardies and threats will undoubtedly give rise to the long-term negative consequences. In this context, it is critical more than ever that we consolidate joint efforts of the international community to protect security, maintain stability, and ensure overall sustainable development. Obviously, we can bring lasting peace, build a harmonious life of mankind and prosperity of countries primarily on the basis of mutual understanding.